Hi, my name is Jeremy. I am a fabricator and mechanic, and I am on a journey to build a 1937 Auto Union Type C replica. Today's episode, we're going to go over how I got this Volkswagen torsion housing out of the back of the pan, as well as the front beam off over here. And that's it. Let's get to the video. Well, we have the suspension units now. So what we're going to use is in here. Oh, that's fairly dark. But right here and behind here, there's a big tube that runs across that the torsion bars go in the ends of. So I'm going to cut those out, turn them 90 degrees so they run this way in the chassis that we're building, and then we'll be able to use stock Volkswagen suspension bits and bushings. This is the end of the torsion bar housing. This is the torsion bar housing itself, this bigger tube behind here. And then right here is the spring plate that actually holds the car up and down. So either something's broken or somebody put it back together wrong or something, but it's down all the way right now, which is not correct. Then up here in the front, we'll be using this ball joint type beam. So the threaded rod means that there's no springs in there. They have a pack of leaf springs in each one of these that go all the way across. But we do have a ball joint front end. This will get trimmed off, and then we will use this mount right here. We'll run a push rod that goes inside the fuselage of the Type C, but we have all of our steering stuff, and on a Volkswagen, because it is left-hand drive, the steering gear, right there's the steering gear. Sorry, I was pointing in the wrong place. Right there, somewhere. I promise you it's up in there. There's a steering gear right there. Anyway, on the car, it's mounted right over here. But on ours, we'll be able to move it to the center of the beam because it just clamps on with a pair of bolts. And then we'll be able to extend our tie rods so they're equal. Because on the stock Volkswagen, the bump steer is different on each side because they have different length tie rods. So the swinging arc is much shorter on the driver's side than the passenger side. And this right here, the square hole, is what drives the speedometer, but we won't need that. So we'll probably end up doing the Baja modification where you drill out the spindle and then tap it and put in a bolt, because the spindle is hollow. The speedometer cable runs in the back of the spindle and comes out through the center, and that's what drives the speedo. The bushings are all completely shot, but I was going to replace those anyway. So we don't care about the shocks because we're using different shocks, and these will get cut off. The original Type C only had a spring, had a torsion bar in the bottom tube, and they have another arm just like a Volkswagen. Well, a Volkswagen is just like them actually because they predated these. But up here, this only ran into the car just a little ways, and it was the mount for the shock absorbers. So we'll do some modifications to make it look right, but we're not going to actually be using the stock shock absorbers or anything like that. They'll be inside the car. But I'm excited because this is the other big components that I needed were the suspension bits, and now I have them. So I'll start ripping this dude apart, and I think what I'll do is I'll probably pull the body off the pan and just sit it over somewhere because I don't need it, and that way I'll be able to access the torsion housings in here a lot easier to cut them out. There's just 4 of these tabs that hold in the gas tank, so we'll pull these off. So then we should be able to pull this guy out. out, dispose of it. Here you can see the front two body mounts. Dunk, dunk. Somebody's already started loosening this one up, but here's our steering dampener, which we'll have to remove and come up with a different solution. And then here is our steering box. It clamps on with a pair of bolts down here on the bottom. And there's two different notches for Volkswagens and Gias. I believe Gias are, the gear is tilted lower because the car is so much lower. There are two big bolts right down here per side of the beam that run back into this head unit here. So it's quite simple to remove the beam, but I think the first thing we're going to do is pull all the body bolts, get the Bobcat over here, and lift the body off of the pan. Undo this, like so. Let's see if she'll come loose. Oh, yeah. Easy peasy. It's one of the reasons this car was so cheap, because it's a Flintstone mobile. Also, just an FYI, the passenger side always rusts out on a Beetle first because the battery goes back here. It's the negative cable, actually. And the battery acid and stuff eats this away. This side's usually just empty for like storage and whatnot. But here are 4 more of the body bolts. So I'll go ahead and start. So don't do this at home. This is how you get to the bottom body bolts though, when you don't have the car on lift. I'm not getting under this, by the way, but there's a whole row that run along this seam. So I have that set in the gravel where it's not really hurting it too badly, but I don't care, again, it's not my problem. But also, I do have the safety on the hydraulics as a just in case. But once these are loose, if I did not have the strap running around the pan would fall off. So the strap is actually running around the pan, holding up the car from the bottom, if that makes sense. And here's your torsion bar housing. So it runs crossways in here, and we'll be able to reuse these, maybe not exactly reuse them, but we'll be able to use the torsion plates, torsion bars, everything, stock Volkswagen parts. So there's one on this side, one over there, and those two up there that I have to cut off. I'll probably just use the torch real quick. And there it is. So we got all the bolts loose, yank the body off, and then all I need is this tube across here that holds the torsion bars. And then these plates are splined onto the other end of the torsion bar so that they are the suspension. And I don't know, they feel like there's something in there, so I'm guessing somebody had this apart and then put the cap on when it was sitting down or something, because you have to have them jacked up really far to be able to put them back on where they belong to hold the car up at the right height. So I was thinking that this didn't have any torsion bars in the back, but I think I might have been wrong. I paid for the undercoating. Never pay for the undercoating. We got our steering gear and all that. And we'll go ahead and yank off these 4 bolts, pull the nose off. Plan is to, well, unbolt these big bolts. I'll have to go get a wrench because they have a nut on the back side. Cut the arm off here, and cut this off across here. Go. And there is our rear torsion bar housing. So you can see that it's basically, it was originally just a big tube that then had these ends welded on, and then these support the car. So we'll pull it apart and see, but somewhere in here, right about here, and here you can see they're crimped down. Somewhere in here is where the torsion bars end and the splined pieces are that hold that up, that hold it from turning. So we'll split it somewhere here in the middle between those 2 bars, and then we'll turn them 90 so that these caps are facing the back of the car, and they'll be almost identical to what the originals look like. I'll put a picture up over there of what the originals look like. And this is a type C with swing axles, and then this is a type D with the Dion tube like I have. But you can see both of them have the torsion bars running up they run inside of the main tubes of the chassis, because they had a 3-inch tube on each side of the chassis that was the main frame rail, and the rear torsion bars just sat inside that and had a very similar, this would have just been the end of the frame if we were talking about how this all worked. So if you're looking towards the front of the car, this would have been the end of the frame, torsion bar went in, the friction shock was on the end here, and then this went out to a little bar that the axle was up above and suspended from. So it'll be a very similar setup to how the originals did it. So let's go ahead and yank that beam off. There we go. There you have it, the beam. She's loose. Oop, that's how you lose stuff. That's a good snap-on too. But yeah, we'll go ahead and get these parts inside And here we have the beam out. So this is a, I believe 67 up or this way, but it is a ball joint type front beam. We don't care about the brakes; those are going in the trash can. But it is complete, minus springs. It does not have springs in. We got both tie rods, which also won't need probably. But we have the steering gear. You have the steering gear complete unit, which is nice. It feels pretty tight. This will get moved over to the center of the tube because you're sitting in the middle. And then the shock absorbers will get removed. All of this will get cut off, and then I'll put a piece of tube vertically in between these two to look more like the originals, the original Type C's. And then the bottom here, I know it's a top view, but it's the bottom tube, will have a big sleeve to make it 3 inches, at least inside the bodywork, so probably over to the mounting point. They'll have a 3-inch diameter sleeve because the originals, see here, have a single torsion bar in the bottom, and that's the big 3-inch tube that bolts onto the front of the frame rails, or it might be the front of the frame, I can't remember. And then the top tube on them does not go all the way across. It is just the ends for the torsion, or not torsion, for the friction shocks, and the pivot point for the upper control arm. So that's all that is. And then here we have the torsion housing out, and you can see all the way through it. Way down in there, in the middle, here where it necks down, is a block that has splines in it. It's probably only about that wide, actually. So we're going to cut that in half, the whole tube assembly. We're going to clean all this garbage off, of course. Cut this assembly off, or cut this in half, and then they'll be turned 90 degrees, mounted in the car. Most all of this will get trimmed off as well. These are the torsion bars and the housings for the end. So we'll be reusing the stock Volkswagen components, and I'll put up a picture of my suspension design currently. So what that will entail is this end will go out to support the axle, and then there will be, I'll add another piece on that comes out here a ways, and then a shock absorber will mount vertically inside the body of the car, so I can use modern hydraulic shocks. And then this will be trimmed down to look more appropriate for the original car. And then there will be a rod running up to the axle will be up here and suspended from this. But that's the plan, and that way we'll also be able to use bushings everywhere, which will make the car nicer and quieter. So what I'll probably do is I'll probably get some polyurethane bushings and replace all of those, of course. But what this means is that all of the suspension will have bushings, which will make it much more pleasant to drive. Solid stuff is cool for handling and racing, but this isn't going to be for racing. This is going to be for driving. This will be like a summertime everyday car.